And joining me now for an exclusive interview is Iuliia Osmolovska, Director at Globesec Kyiv. Good evening to you, ma'am.
Good evening.
So we're again hearing reports from US intelligence that Vladimir Putin's war aims remain unchanged. The Kremlin also says any talks between Ukraine, Russia and America are not being considered. So I'm interested in your view on this. Are we any closer to peace, or are we just going around in circles?
No, I think that appearance of this type of assessment, which actually had been already contradicted by the source, that it was not something that was coming from the US intelligence. So we hear these contradicting statements, but it's very good that they both of them are in public, because this gives the reality check, the reality assessment, and sends signals to the US decision makers and politicians who are looking into the peace settlements that it's not a very simple thing to do, and there are a lot of shadows of grey in this process, and that this idea is still in air is very good, because it's, as I mentioned, would give that understanding that we are far from the happy end, unfortunately.
And you're right to say that there are a number of contradictory statements, both from the Donald Trump administration and, of course, from the reports on US intelligence. What about if we look at these mooted trilateral talks between Russia, Ukraine and the United States? Do you think there's merit in bringing the three countries into one room, or would it just be some kind of a PR exercise? Do you think it would be helpful?
As far as I understand, at the moment they're not feasible. At least this has been the science of the Russian officials, and I think a lot will depend on these parallel talks that are currently happening in Florida between the US delegates and Russia on one hand, and US delegation and Ukraine on the other hand. Or the signs that we are not in the very productive moment. I could say that because Russia denied actually the suggested Christmas ceasefire for a couple of days, and they keep saying that we shouldn't be expecting any progress in next week because of the holiday festivities in Western world and the US in particular. So this is where we are, unfortunately, and these hopes that something big would have been achieved by the Christmas time is definitely off the table.
Well, the thing is as well, we've heard peace is 90% of the way there, meaning the remaining 10%, if that is true, must come down to land concessions, especially in Ukraine's east and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, right? So could the last 10%, these land concessions, the power plant, I mean, could they be the deal breaker that brings everything else back to square one, because they are such fundamental points here?
Yes, there had been the statements of our president too that yes, from one hand we are very close to the deal, but on the other hand, this deal could, we should expect that this deal won't be achieved at all. Meaning that you shouldn't be in a miracle here, because these 10% might be the most essential stumbling block that could break the whole agreement, because on this particular issue, the territory, now we still have absolutely opposing positions of the Ukrainian side and the Russian side. So these three main sticking points, probably capturing the big deal or the most deal and time and energy of all the delegations who are currently engaged in talks.
Over in Paris, the Elysees Palace is open to the idea of bilateral talks between President Putin and Emmanuel Macron. Is that a positive diplomatic move, or does it risk legitimizing the Kremlin?
I think that from tactical considerations, this is a smart move from Europe to go, because as we've seen for the last couple of months, that it has been mostly US-led talks. However, if we're talking about the war, Russian aggression in Ukraine, it's about European security. So Europe is absolutely legal actor and stakeholder in these talks, and they have been sidelined for some time. So what we've seen within the recent developments is actually this meeting in Berlin, where the US delegation also met with the European delegation. Then allegedly the meeting of national security advisors was supposed to happen in the US with the inclusion of the European representatives. So I think that Europe is gradually getting back to the place where it should be in the negotiation. Because, for instance, if we are talking about the potential leverage, who is going to have this potential leverage over Russia? In financial terms, it's definitely Europe, because of the frozen assets, the majority of which are in Europe, and the recent crucial decisions taken at the European summit signal to Russia, indicate that yes, probably at this stage, the solution hasn't been achieved about the frozen assets, but it's not the end of the game. So actually, if Russia going to be keeping this stubborn position, so nobody knows, probably next urgent European Council meeting would deliver absolutely different results. So I think that, yes, this is a very good sign that Europe's are showing much more itself in these negotiations.
And when it comes to that direct line of communication between Moscow and Europe, we had our correspondent in Kyiv earlier mentioning that President Macron was speaking to Putin before the full-scale invasion back in 2022. It didn't seem to shift the dial. I mean, is Emmanuel Macron the right person to go one-on-one with President Putin? Or do you think that perhaps a coalition of the willing style meeting or some leaders from across Europe meeting with Putin would be a better idea, a more diversified group of leaders?
Yes, but I think that the role of President Macron here could be as an icebreaker, if you wish, because we've seen for the last couple of years a total isolation or the lack of dialogue, which was justified actually and still is justified. But because this isolation had been broken by the different approach from the US side, so I think it's reasonable enough to adjust the tactics right now. And yes, Macron could be just the first leader to contact Russia, and then the appropriate formats, as you mentioned, there could be different formats of these leading countries that show themselves. Or, for instance, the one that issued this joint declaration on Monday, and Poland included, would be a very group to communicate with Russia. But again, we have to be very, very careful in order not to send to Russia the wrong signals that Europe's are seeking this dialogue with Russia. So Russia would interpret this as they're having the upper hand of the situation, which is not the case. As I mentioned before, Europe has to clearly state and show to Russia that it has the leverage in these negotiations and it has the legitimate role to play here. So Russians, given the appalling stance of the economy right now, definitely are very much aware of this fact. So this should be orchestrated and played very dedicatedly from the European side.
So it's about not legitimizing the Kremlin, but ensuring that Europe is part of these negotiations. Ms. Osmolovska, you've spent a long time working with the Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Ministry. You've spent a long time advising on cooperation with NATO member states. So I want to end with a simple question. As we sit here tonight, what is your message to President Zelensky and his negotiators in Miami?
I think the Ukrainian negotiation doing the right thing. So we hear this official constructive statements of all of the sides, indicating that all of them are genuinely interested in looking for some kind of solution that could be appropriate and accepted by all the sides. Second, the encouraging sign is that Ukraine still keeps the crucial points for itself, signaling very clearly that we're not going to step down from the very crucial points, and also keep engaged in this dialogue with the Europeans, because when we are talking about the meaningful and real security guarantees, the assistance of the partners, I mean, especially in terms of the troops present on the ground, this is okay, but the most crucial driver is actually the capacity of Ukraine to deter and defend itself with the very strong defense industry. And this is what we've been observing with the active actions of the Ukrainian decision makers right now. So my message would be probably keep going this track and probably bring more clarity at some point of having the new head of the office appointed and the chief negotiator responsible, appointed and clear directions and tasks set by all the teams in participating on different layers in these negotiations.
Iuliia Osmolovska, Director at Globesec Kyiv, thank you as always for your time. And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.